Hi, in this video I'm going to run through an installation of Fusion Application Server onto a single host. I've already prepared the host and copied the installer over into the opt installers folder, as you can see here. There's the installer. So there is a GUI or a GUI installer which requires X Windows. I don't have that on this OS since I've installed a minimal Red Hat install, Red Hat server. So I'm going to run through the headless installer. Both install mechanisms have a quick mode which defaults many of the options for you. This is suitable for single host development type setups, but I'm going to run through the headless advanced install, which is more typical of a production install. Take a look at the documentation for further details of the install modes and FAS clustering options. Also check out the installer documentation for full details of the prerequisites to installing a FAS cluster. So, as I said, I've already prepared a host ready to run the installer. I've installed Red Hat OS 6, and we can just check that briefly by catting etc Red Hat releases. So we'll do that, Red Hat releases, and you can see I've got 6.4 Red Hat Enterprise Server. Okay, I can also check the bit size, so you name -A, and you can see I've got 64-bit Red Hat 6.4, which is one of the prerequisites for installing FAS. We also need Java, so I'll just check the Java version. Java -version, and you can see I've got Java 7 build 60, 64-bit. We can also check where that's installed. We'll actually know that I've installed it into user Java, and you can see there's a soft link there, latest, which I'm going to use. So the installer properties file requires that you specify the location of your Java installed, so I'm going to use /user/java/latest. You'll see that later on. Okay, so we need to make sure that IP tables, the Linux firewall, is either configured correctly for our use or turned off. I'm going to make sure it's turned off because it's just easier to do that at this stage. You can always turn it on and configure it correctly later on. So chk config --list IP tables. See, you can see it's off at all run levels, and make sure the service is stopped. So service IP tables status. Oops. There we go. Firewall's not running. Okay, so we also need to make sure that our host name is resolvable. So the host name of this host is training, and I'm just going to see if it's resolvable by using the ping command. Notice that I'm using command substitution quotes, back quotes there. So that'll substitute the IP address of this host into the ping command, which is 192.168.56.250. Okay, so the host is ready. First thing to do is unpack the installer. So the installer is in this folder here. There it is. It's delivered as a zip off our download server. So I'm going to unzip that, and I'm going to put it in a folder called FAS. Just makes it a little bit easier. Okay, so cd into FAS. FAS. So we need to edit a properties file, the advanced properties file. And you can see that we ship a number of properties files, one for the advanced installer, advanced installer, one for the quick installer, and an upgrade as well. We're going to use the advanced installer here, so we need to edit this file. So we're going to use vi for that. Vi yes advanced installer.properties. Okay. So we don't need to change the install mode. We're not doing a quick install, we're doing an advanced install. So we'll leave that as it is. I'm happy with the install path. I'm going to run the installer as root, so you need to make sure, or I need to make sure that root has read-write access to that folder. I know he does. You can install FAS and run FAS as a non-root user, but you need to make sure that the user you're using has read and write access into the path that you're going to install into. More details on that later. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that our JDK path is /user/java/latest. So I did that there. So I'm going to install FAS onto a single host. This will force me to install an app server and a load balancer as a master node. So there's no need for me to change any of these properties. I'm going to leave them as they are. Take a look at the installation and architecture guides for more details on installing multi-host clusters and typical topologies architectures of FAS. Okay, so on to the next property. As I mentioned before, I'm going to install as the root user. FAS can be installed and run as a non-root user if your local security policies dictate that. But when installing and running as a non-root user, you need to make sure that that user has access to the folder you're going to install into, and you will require root access to install the service scripts. But from that point, once you've installed the service scripts as root, from that point onwards, you can run FAS as the non-root user. So take a look at the install guide for further details of that. For this install, I'm going to use the root user to install and run the FAS services. I'm not going to change the key store password. We'll leave it as it is and move on to the next properties. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm running the installer as the root user, so I want to create the services and I want to start the services post-install. So I'm going to leave these properties as they are. As I mentioned earlier, if you're running the installer and you want to run the FAS processes as the non-root user, then you'll need to set these values to false and add the services as the root user post-install. Check out the install guide for more details of that. So now we'll move on to general configuration. So FAS, JBoss management and SIP HTTP traffic can be segregated onto different interfaces. Note that application management web admin UIs installed on the FAS will use the service traffic interfaces. This application management traffic can be segregated by installing the web admin UIs for the applications onto different FAS clusters. We're not installing any apps here, just the base application server that applications run on. So I'm not going to do any of that, and you can always check out the application install and admin guides for the applications for more details of that. So I'm going to use the IP address of my service here, or my host here, which is 192.168.56.250, and I'm going to have both types of traffic on that that interface. 168.56.250. Okay, so I'm happy with the default user and password for the admin console and UI. These can be changed at install time, and they can be changed and managed post-install. So you can add admin users or add users that you want to admin the system, and change the password of existing admin users. More details in the documentation for that. I'm not going to be configuring any SNMP capabilities for this install. If you're interested, check out the product documentation for the SNMP capabilities of FAS. So I am installing a single box FAS cluster here, so I will need to provide some details of the master node configuration. So cluster address. So this is the address that entities will use typically to address the cluster, to send traffic to the cluster. Typically for a multi-host cluster, this is an FQDN that resolves to all hosts on the cluster. Note that in a production install, there may well be a load balancer in front of the cluster. Take a look at the architecture guide for examples of deployment topologies. Since this is a single host, I'm going to use its IP address, and this is okay for lab development type of installs. IP address is 192.168.56.250. Okay. So there's no need for me to add a cluster ID. The installer will work that out from the IP address or from the cluster address. So we'll leave that as it is. I'm not installing a slave node. I'm installing a master node, so we can leave that as it is. And I believe that's it. Yeah. Okay, so that's it. So now we're ready to run the installer. So we just need to save this properties file. Oops, still in insert mode. Save the properties file and run the installer. So the installer is a Java process, so Java -jar es.jar and -options and specify the name of the advanced installer properties file. So there we go. So Java -jar, name of the AS installer jar file, -options, then the name of the advanced properties file. And prints out some useful information, tells you where it is in the install process. Starting the services, so it's created the Unix services, now it's starting them. It shouldn't be too much longer. If there are any issues with any of the values in the properties file, then one of these steps will fail, and the installer writes a debug log with more detailed information in there. So if you see a failure at any one of these stops, normally due to some typo or mistake in the install.properties file, then you can take a look at the debug.log file and correct the mistake and just rerun the installer again. That should be fine. And there we go. No issues. So if we do LL again, you can see that the installer has written this debug.log file. We can look at that to see if there are any issues. So now let's check to see that everything is running as we'd expect it. So the first thing to do is check the FAS service. So service FAS status, and that tells us that it's running, and it shows us a process ID. But there are a few processes that make up a FAS service. So I'll have a look at all of the Java processes running on this host. Oh, we don't want to do A. And there we go. You can see there are 5 of them. So you can check out the admin and architecture guides for more details of the processes and what each process does, its roles and responsibilities. So now I'm going to finally check that we can actually connect to the admin console. So I need to get a browser window up. So I'll just get an incognito window from Chrome and go to https 192.168.56.250, and the port is 9990. Okay. So I'll accept the security certificate, which is an installer-signed, self-signed certificate. In a production environment, you might want to, or you probably will want to secure that with a certificate that's been signed by a well-known certificate authority. So if you remember, our user was administrator, as was the password. Oh, typed it wrong. And there we go. There's the JBoss admin UI. So FAS is installed and running. That's it. We've installed FAS onto a single host, and now we're ready to install applications. So thank you for watching. I've been David Shutt, and don't forget to check out the product documentation for more details and support.cafex.com for more how-to guides. Thank you.